Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Anubha Bhonsle, and this evening we are focusing on the targeted killings of minorities in Kashmir. The last 15 days have actually made it absolutely clear that these are targeted killings. Among those who have died in the mindless violence in Kashmir are Kashmiri Pandits and Sikhs, those who continue to stay in the valley through the tumultuous 90s and post, and migrant workers from different parts of the country who, ironically, have continued to return to Kashmir through the years and through many tumultuous years as well. I have with me today Rahul Pandita. He is a fellow journalist, someone who tracks Kashmir but also lives and breathes Kashmir. He is a native of the land, and he and his family had to leave Kashmir in the 90s and have never returned since then. So he speaks today from that full arc and from that unique lived experience. Um, Rahul, thank you so much for sparing time and speaking to us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Anubha.
I've spoken to some people in the valley. We've obviously heard and read details about migrant workers either preparing to go back home, either being in shelters, either being under the watchful eyes of security forces. To just begin this conversation, it would be good to know as to what you are picking from the ground, and more importantly, what's different this time, if there is anything different.
There's a remarkable difference this time, Anubha, in the sense that the strategy of how the terrorist groups want to portray themselves has completely changed. Let me use something which will definitely resonate with you. I think what is happening in Kashmir is what we have seen happening in Manipur uh, at one point in time, where you have these small insurgent groups comprising of 5, 10, you know, young boys. But the only difference is that in Manipur, those militant groups work independently, they work on their own. Um, in Kashmir's case, it is certain that all these groups are just handled by people in our neighborhood. That is the only difference. The other remarkable difference is that if you followed insurgency in Kashmir, you've seen how the police tracks what we call overground workers. So there's a clear trajectory of how that works. A young boy becomes a stone pelter, then he becomes a chronic stone pelter, then he comes in the notice of an overground worker or a terrorist, and then he becomes an overground worker. And one fine day, the police will wake up and see a picture of the same boy getting viral on social media with a gun in his hand, etc. Now the strategy is changed in the sense that you will not see any of that happening. So it is a big challenge for police now because most of these people have no police record, so they are under radar. So that offers a big challenge to the security agencies in Kashmir.
Um, why don't we talk in terms of the killings, so to speak, of migrant workers and the minorities? Rahul, it's not as if after the abrogation of Article 370, there wasn't a targeting of migrant workers. My question is sort of more leading to that. What's different about this time? It's not as if there haven't been intelligence reports in the past that prominent Kashmiri Pandits who have stayed in the valley from the 90s would be targets every time there is sort of any upsurge, so to speak, in the valley.
I think this time there was a tangible intelligence input about the fact that some prominent Kashmiri Pandits, especially in Srinagar area, will be targeted. We've been picking up, personally, we've been picking up chatter from the evening of September 21 onwards, when we realized that the J&K police has put up a posse of guards outside a prominent sweet shop in the heart of Srinagar, run by a Hindu businessman. And there's a temple nearby where a few cops showed up in the night and asked the priest to switch off the temple light. So it has never happened before in this way in the last 30 years of insurgency. Now you're right in saying that there have been targeted killings earlier also. In the 2000s we've seen the Hizbul Mujahideen, for example, targeting migrant laborers several times. But what is stark and dangerous this time is the continuity of it, the randomness of it, where, anyone who is the so-called non-local Hindu, a migrant, or a Kashmiri Pandit, tomorrow it could be a tourist, which is a big change, because even in the most dangerous times in Kashmir, barring a few incidents here and there, you could see a stone pelting happening in the heart of Srinagar, just 200 meters away from where, say, Gujarati tourists would be picking up, paper mache boards, etc., from the market. But that is kind of changed now, in the sense that what is dangerous about it is the randomness of it. A Golgappa seller in the heart of Srinagar, a migrant laborer here, a school teacher in a government school nearby. That is very challenging for the security forces.
You mentioned the school teachers, and in that first sort of set of attacks that had happened against the minorities, one was alerted as to how it was carried out, especially the attack on school teachers, that teachers being lined up in a government school and two being picked out on the basis of their Aadhaar card or names. I'm wondering what that has done to the community that has continued to stay in the valley.
Now, we must understand the difference between the targeting of someone who's from the majority community in Kashmir, a Kashmiri Muslim, and the random or even the selected targeting of someone who's from the minority community. Every now and then you see a local cop being targeted by terrorist groups, or even a civilian, a shopkeeper, on the suspicion that he or she is a police informant, etc. But you see, in that case, it does not create a fear psychosis of the scale you realize it has in case of the minorities. If tomorrow a local Golgappa seller is targeted, you will not see the exodus of Kashmiri Muslims who are selling Golgappas or who are street vendors. But when you do it to a minority, anywhere in the world, when you do it to a minority, it creates a certain fear psychosis. Now, migrant laborers will, many of them have left. They also left in 2009 in hundreds of thousands, we say. But when the situation became a little better, they came back. So tomorrow, 2 months later, when perhaps the situation becomes better, hopefully, they might come back. But people who live there, I'm talking about a handful of Kashmiri Pandits, about 800 odd families who never left Kashmir. Now this game becomes dangerous for them. This uncertainty every time some incident happens and a phase occurs in Kashmir's bloodied insurgency, when they suddenly become targets. So after a point in time, they realize that they do not have any permanent future in Kashmir. Even now, as we speak, in this phase, there are a handful of Kashmiri Pandit families who never left Kashmir in the last 32 years and have now left.
Have
Um,
now left.
yes, they have.
Never to return, or that's not
Well,
on their mind yet.
well, who knows? As of now, it's very ironical. I was speaking to a young friend who's a government employee. I mean, his family is in Jammu, but he's a government employee who works in Srinagar. So when the targeted killings of teachers happened, he left the next day with his wife. So his wife received a call from her mother asking them whether they've picked up warm clothes, woolens. So my friend's wife said that we'll be back soon. We don't need to pick up those warm clothes. So her mother said that this is what we thought when we left Kashmir in '90, that we'll be back. but it's been 30 years and will not be back. So I think that one simple sentiment kind of explains it all.
And that's why many like you have drawn sort of that analogy between the 90s and are continuously also stressing on the fact that this is an exodus of sorts. I mean, do you believe that purely in terms of the fear psychosis this has created, this is a fair analogy?
Now we must make a distinction between what the minority is feeling and the state's response to it. As far as the minority is concerned, it's a redux of 1990. They're feeling exactly the same. At least as far as the Kashmiri Pandits are concerned, there's complete fear. I've spoken in the past couple of weeks to several to several Kashmiri Pandits who live there, as temporary government servants, or who, people who are not left. People like Sanjay Tikku, the head of the organization of Kashmiri Pandits, who are not left there. There is complete fair psychosis, and nobody can deny it. But I think the Indian state today is much more powerful than what we experienced in Kashmir in 8990. Remember the time when the erstwhile Union Home Minister Mufti Muhammad Said's daughter Rubayya Said was kidnapped from the heart of Srinagar in December 89. That was a time when the civil and the police administration in Kashmir had completely collapsed. The Indian state, when it was asked to bend, it began to crawl in Kashmir. So I don't think we have that kind of situation. But we must also acknowledge the fact that there's a little panic among security agencies in Kashmir. We've seen the kind of very ad hoc handling of the migrant crisis after the two recent killings in Kulgam. On the same night, the Kashmir police issued a directive asking CRPF and local police officers to get all the migrant laborers in their areas to safe security camps, and then suddenly backtracked on it, saying that the advisory getting viral on social media is fake. But by the time some of us were talking to our sources in the CRPF and in the Jammu and Kashmir police, and we realized that by the time hundreds of laborers have already been shifted to camps, and after an hour or so, many of them were relocated back to their dwellings. So that speaks volumes about the kind of panic and confusion about the way this crisis should be handled. Um, uh, it's a big challenge, of course. We must acknowledge that also. But I think there's also some sort of ad hocism with which this crisis has been handled at the top level.
Rahul, if I can just use that answer to drive a different point. I mean, you talk about a powerful state, but decades later, it's the same powerful state that has been unable to protect minorities, and that remains similar to the 90s and now.
It is definitely it is. There's no doubt about it.
Go ahead. You want to add something to that?
No, I mean, that's it. And it's very tragic. I was speaking to some people, and they're very angry about the fact that nobody among, say, Mr. Modi or Mr. Amit Shah has kind of responded to this crisis. You have a prime minister who has a tweet to offer and everything. On a day-to-day basis, he offers birthday wishes to many of his admirers and well-wishers, etc. But this time, there's not been even a murmur. The other fact is, and I keep talking about it, when the migrant crisis erupted in the wake of COVID first wave, you saw many well-meaning people in Delhi, across India, making these beautiful videos, tragic videos about the plight of migrant laborers, moving from Delhi, Mumbai, Bhopal, etc. But this time, there's absolutely stunning silence about the fate of hundreds of thousands of migrant laborers who find themselves at crossroads. There's a tragic video of a migrant laborer I shared yesterday on my Twitter, who's trying to become a part of the Kashmiri milieu, and he's singing that. It's so tragic. It really, really broke my heart.
You speak of Mr. Modi, Rahul, and many sort of within the community are big admirers of him, are big supporters of the party and Mr. Modi's personality in a sense. And you talk about sort of the lack of even a murmur or a sentence of condolence, etc. But I'm just wondering, why does it continue to surprise the community, since Mr. Modi is not really known to speak about attacks against minorities in any other part of the country, right? So why is this expectation really continued over the last two terms of the BJP under the leadership of Mr. Modi?
I think it's also because of the fact that I'm at various times at the receiving end of anger from my own community. The um, confusion and chaos around my film Shikara last year, where I was accused of burying the truth, etc. Um, I think one major reason why this is happening is that in 8990, when the exodus happened, the Kashmiri Pandit community found itself as absolute orphans. No government, may it be the left parties or the mainstream political parties like the Congress, etc., or the United Front government. They did not care about them. There's a time when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, who was in the opposition at that point in time, visits Kashmir in the March of 1990, when as the Kashmiri Pandits are migrating to safer pastures in Jammu and elsewhere, and the camps in refugee camps have already been established in Jammu. He skips the entire tour of Jammu. He does not come. So at that point in time, it was the local BJP workers here and there, the broad right wing spectrum of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and Vishnu Hindu Parishad, or the Shiva Sena under Balasaheb Thackeray, who sort of came to the rescue of Kashmiri Pandits, even for their own political mileage. I keep on saying this, that the BJP catapulted itself into a national party on the basis of two major themes. One is Kashmir, and one is the Ram Janmabhoomi, the entire movement. Remember the slogans in the 90s: "Doodh mangoge to kheer denge, Kashmir mangoge to cheer denge," etc. So there's a glimmer of hope from there, but I think that is increasingly getting extinguished now. Especially in the backdrop of what we have seen in the last couple of weeks. When Mr. Modi goes to the diaspora in the United States, and some people out of emotion kisses hand. And now you reached a point where there's not a single acknowledgement about what will happen to them, what will happen to the government employees, and just one small, and there is so much of in the last couple of weeks we've seen orders coming from education officers in Kashmir saying that no, the migrant employees have to come back, they have to return to their duty, and people who do not return to their duty, action will be taken against them. And then two more killings happen, and then the order is backtracked, saying, oh, okay, they can take classes, in case of teachers, they can take online classes. So there's complete apathy about the fate of Kashmiri Pandits and what will happen to them, which is now kind of dawning upon many people in the community.
Um, Rahul, there are lots of sort of viewer questions related to your film Shikara and all the criticism you got, and I'll pick those towards the end of our conversation. I want to briefly touch upon the aftermath of the abrogation of Article 370. You reported from the ground. I was there a few weeks later. And it is sort of an opinion, but a personal opinion of mine, that in Kashmir, the aftermath of the abrogation of Article 370 has not been fully reported, has not been fully articulated, and if I may say, has not really fully manifested as well. Now, yes, the old political class may have been delegitimized, but the new one is not really any better, so to speak. In the light of all of that, in the light of all this suppression, as I said at the start, some of what is happening is perhaps not entirely unanticipated. How would you read it?
I think what has happened is that this is what I have picked up, and this is also my personal opinion because I cover Kashmir. I follow Kashmir on a day-to-day basis, even minute-to-minute basis. I think there has been some kind of hubris about the fact that Kashmir has changed now in the past few months, in the aftermath of the abrogation of Article 370. Um, and most of this hubris was unwarranted. You have done something which many would argue was required. um, I'm also of the same belief that the abrogation of Article 370 was created because, in my opinion, it has created a plethora of problems in Jammu and Kashmir, which needed to be tackled once for all. The way it was tackled was harsh, in terms of internet lockdowns and scores of detentions, etc. That we can debate about, but the decision itself was much required. Um, but I'm interested in what happened in the last few months. These really unwarranted actions where you have put up thousands of flags, the national flags, all across valley. You are making viral a video of militant commander Burhan Wani's father unfurling the national flag in his school. A lot of hubris on the fact that Kashmiri Pandits will get their property.
Land back.
How will they get their property back? 95% of Kashmiri Pandits have sold their property. I'll give an example. I've sold my property in Srinagar in the 90s under distress. Now, what is the blueprint the government is offering me? If I claim tomorrow, and I have a proper case. I'll say that this property was sold on power of authority, so it is null and void. I want my property back. So, what is the blueprint the government has offered me? Am I supposed to get the property back at the price I sold it to that person, or am I supposed to get it at the rates which are applicable now? And what about my safety and security? So these are questions which have not been addressed. But these issues have been advertised so much. These issues have been magnified so much. There are murmurs in Kashmir that. And this is very tangible chatter we've been picking up, and I've spoken about it. That one big reason why this is happening is because the government said that the Kashmiri Pandits will get their
Land.
land back. So it's always a problem, which if you look at the other way is also problematic because it means that as long as you're going to Kashmir as tourists,
That's
um,
fine.
contributing in Kashmir's economy, you're fine. You're a guest, and the cab driver will drop you at the airport and hug you. But the moment you say that you need to have a more permanent stake in Kashmir, then there's a dangerous randomness or selectiveness in some cases where you will be targeted.
So are you saying some of this hubris was unnecessary, it was false bravado
It
that
was.
perhaps further perpetuated the fear of a demographic change, of land being lost, etc.? It's not exactly that people are going up to buy land in Kashmir.
It was, and it's not as if the abrogation has happened 2 years back, right? It's not as if the government of India has moved thousands of people. There were talk about that ex-servicemen will be shifted to border areas, along Uri and other places, but none of that has happened. It's just these are all IT cell ads being made viral on Twitter and Facebook and on WhatsApp group of Uncle G's. Otherwise, no work regarding that has happened. If, for example, in Kashmiri Pandits case, we've been hearing for not in the last 7 years, we've been hearing for decades that land is being identified for the return of Kashmiri Pandits. I mean, I fail to understand. I mean, I just want to know what is stopping the government from identifying that land. What is happening? There is um, plenty of land available in Kashmir, but these are yes, these are all jumlas basically. Nothing tangible has happened on the ground.
My final question before I'll move into two to three questions that we've got it from the viewers. Um, Rahul, what would give the minority community assurance? Uh, you've often sort of spoken about the symbolism or sort of attacked the symbolism of Kashmiri Muslims turning up for funerals of Kashmiri Pandits or the last rites or helping out, etc. I think more recently you're unconvinced by two mosques speaking in favor of the minorities and continuing or asking them to stay. So my question is, what would give the community a sense of succor and assurance that would be meaningful?
I'm not entirely convinced. I mean, it's a welcome step. Two mosques in downtown Srinagar, apparently. I confirmed it from Sanjay Tikku, who lives in that area. He said that indeed it has happened. But all I'm saying is that, after 30 years of exodus and the fact that the majority community in Kashmir is in absolute denial about the circumstances that led to the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits. Two two religious leaders speaking from their pulpits in a mosque. It's just a symbolic. It just does not mean anything beyond that. Now, as far as the safety and security of Kashmiri Pandit is concerned, Anubha, it is tied to the overall security scenario of Jammu and Kashmir. It cannot be looked at in isolation. I keep on saying that, and this is one reason. This is one big reason why this has happened. What has happened in the last few years is that the entire focus of the counter-insurgency doctrine in Jammu and Kashmir is conducting these operations, operation. You trap two people in a building and bring that building down, etc., etc. Now, killing terrorists is an essential part of the counter-insurgency doctrine. But if 30 years later you are doing the same thing, then I mean, to me, as a student of counterinsurgency, I think it means that somehow we have missed a point. Uh, we should have spent more and more time in making sure that the young Kashmiri boys, the kind of boy you met several years ago in Kulgam, who was talking about the Shopian incident. Someday you should talk about it in one of your shows. Those kind of boys, they are still getting radicalized. Now we are taking a lot of happiness in the fact that Mr. Burhan Wani's father has unfurled the tricolor. But I shudder to think that when the tricolor is gone, what is he teaching his students in that government school? So, but in my conversations with top officials of security agencies, I've realized one thing. I don't people who are taking decisions at the top level, I don't think they are well aware or they are well read about organizations like the Jamaat-e-Islami, or the I call it the Kashmiri equivalent of Muslim Brotherhood. They do not fully understand the quantum of danger it poses to any sane, plural society, or a society which hopes to become plural at any point in time.
You make such a valid point, Rahul, especially on the counterinsurgency numbers. I think for decades we've continued to hear that these are just a couple of boys in their hundreds. The life cycle of the terrorist is now down to a month or so, etc. And yet it's the same narrative that continues to be peddled. So, yeah, you make a really valid point about how there needs to be sort of a larger scrutiny of that. I'll just pick some questions that came to us via our Instagram channel, Rahul, for you. One that you may have partly answered from Kashmira Murthy, who asks, which government do you think will actually establish the rights of the Kashmiri Pandits in their homeland?
Any government who's serious about it. I mean, so far, we've seen no signals, among the successive governments that they are serious about the return of Kashmir Pandits. At one point in time in the mid 2000s, I'm talking about 2005, 6. That is the only brief time when Kashmir was had almost become normal. You have had a situation where there was no terrorists whosoever in Srinagar. Many other districts were becoming militant free. We were traveling absolutely freely, which was a big thing in the mid 2000s. So many of us thought that situation is coming very very close to normal. At that point in time, something should have happened. It did not happen. Time and again, successive governments got opportunity here and there, but I don't think the return of Kashmiri Pandits is in the serious agenda or in the crosshairs of any government, including Mr. Modi's.
There's someone who calls herself Instagaram who says, "What do you believe is the future of moderate and progressive Muslims in Kashmir?"
It's a very complex question. When Mr. Modi's government, I always talk about it, and I get a lot of bricks, a lot of criticism about this. I truly believe, and this information or this knowledge does not come to me while sitting in Delhi NCR. I speak to a lot of Kashmiris, and I know many of them. Um, there is a silent majority in Kashmir. I always speak about this silent majority. They may not have any love for India, but they're intelligent enough, wise enough to understand that their future lies with the idea of India. So they want this to go. They want their businesses to flourish. They want their kids to, not get radicalized in a situation like this. So when Mr. Modi's government came in 2014, the Hindu nationalist government, chest thumping government, they also got some hope that maybe this problem will be sorted once for all. There will be security operations, this radicalization will be looked at, and so on and so forth. But instead of that, what Mr. Modi's government did is embrace the same people who are in many ways responsible for the mess we find ourselves in. I'm talking about the political alliance with the People's Democratic Party. And, that alliance is directly responsible for the chaos which got created in 2016 in the aftermath of Burhan Wani's death. And we're still reeling from those after effects.
There's a person called Mystic Srishti who says, "How long before we start accepting that there could be a role of locals in these particular attacks?"
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I have never shied away from the fact. And from our experience, we know that any insurgency is not possible without the help of local support. I mean, Pakistan can keep on sending its Jaish commanders, but if one Umar Farooq, the mastermind of Pulwama attack, comes from Narowal, and he infiltrates across the international border in Samba and reaches this part of Jammu. But if there is no Ashik Nehru, a local Kashmiri, to pick him up and ferry him in his truck and then offer him safe sanctuary in Pulwama, uh, Umar Farooq is absolutely useless. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, I've never shied away from that fact.
You've answered this partly in our conversation, but Pooja asks, and common friend, of course, that is this the same as the 90s, or do you believe India is now stronger?
Oh, it is definitely stronger, but like you rightly pointed out, it's perhaps not strong enough to save the minority community in Kashmir. But as far as the overall response is concerned, I think we are at a stronger wicket.
um, there's sort of some love for your storytelling from Anurag, who says, "Please tell him I like his storytelling." And one final question I thought that we would pick up on Shikara,
Thank you,
because what
Anurag.
has it been? A year and a half, and you're still having to defend writing that film. What do you believe bothers the community so much about what could be considered just a love story?
Well, the simple answer to this is that uh, some people really wanted to see a lot of blood and gore. And as far as Kashmir is concerned, or any other area in this country, really, I have never shied away from calling a spade a spade. But as journalists or writers, you also have a certain responsibility towards the society. Writing a book which will be read by, say, 100,000 people or 200,000 people is a different game. You are in a country where Gandhian institutes have worked for 70 years, and they have not created the same kind of impact one Lage Raho Munna Bhai has done, the whole idea of Gandhigiri. So the power of cinema, we have to accept that responsibility. So we did not want to, Vinod and I were clear about the fact that we do not want to make a film which is seen by, say, someone in Lucknow or Bihar or Madhya Pradesh, and the person comes out and starts stabbing people on ground. And I think after 30 years of this turmoil, I think while I personally keep on talking about uh, the so-called truths in Kashmir. I think at some point in time you should also offer some kind of hope to people, to well-meaning people, and to people who want to toe their agendas and want to see blood and gore, or people in Kashmir who do not, who are, say, ISIS supporters. Nothing can be done to them. But we have had incidents where Kashmiri Muslims have seen this film in cinema halls in Jammu, because there are no cinema halls in Kashmir Valley, and they have been moved to tears. I think if that film moved five Kashmiri Muslims to tears, let's forget the fact that if they can do anything about it on a larger scale. But the fact that something has moved in their heart enough to bring them to tears, I think I consider that a success, and I'm absolutely proud of that film.
Fair enough. We'll leave it here, Rahul. But I do believe that you have another sort of movie or a web project coming, again based out of Kashmir. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we wrap it up?
Well,
You can.
yeah, I'll have to wait for the official announcement.
Official
Uh,
announcement.
I think it should
Okay.
happen today, perhaps, but I don't know.
Fair enough. Rahul has a large repository of books that he's written about Kashmir, about different aspects of Kashmir. Rahul, for everyone we bring on Newsworthy, we sort of let them tell our readers what do you believe is a book people should read if they want to know more about Kashmir. We also get a lot of those questions on Instagram. Anything you think people should pick up if they just want to have a better understanding of what happened? Of course, you can plug your own book too.
No, but I mean, apart from plugging my book, I mean, there are some fantastic books on Kashmir. I personally like uh, a book on Kashmir by journalist Manoj Joshi, which came out in 90s, but did not get the kind of response in 90s. I think it has been reprinted. I'm kind of forgetting the name of the book, but it's readily available on Amazon and in bookstores with the new forward, etc. I think it offers a great understanding of what happened in the 1980s. And of course, if you there are many books from the other side of the story, but if you sort of want to know the Kashmiri Pandit point of view, or what happened in Kashmir to the Kashmiri Pandits in the 80s, then perhaps you could pick up Our Moon Has Blood Clots, which is published by Penguin Random House in 2013, written by me.
And still remains a stellar documentation of that tragic loss. Rahul, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Anubha.